welcome back to another Outdoor Philosophy. And today we're going to be talking about dumbing down our kids in the next section. And this actually starts the last section, Reform and Counter-Reform. And we're going to be looking at chapters 17 and 18. The first one is called The Blob, and the second one is an expose of outcome-based education. So, of course, if you're a teacher, you know all about outcome-based education. All right. And we're going to be going through these. And the blob is, I was thinking about the best analogies, and then I came up with a few really good ones that I'm forgetting right off the top of my head. So hopefully I remember them by the time I talk about this. But the blob is really talking about the, it's how all of the organizations were put together, like the unionizations, the academic education boards, so the NEA, the National Education Association, not to be confused with NEA, the National Education Act. And we got a giant bird over there skimming the water. All right, so what they're talking about here is kind of the rise of interest, so special interest in education. And of course, this is really where we get the shift from knowledge into pushing agendas and views. Like, you know, we'll look at some of the outcome-based education and, you know, talking about, in fact, I think this is that page. I think I just randomly flipped to it. Nope, that's not the page. Basically, they're looking at not teaching people what to learn. So this is what they indicate. Students will project anti-racist, anti-biased attitudes through their participation in a multilingual, multi-ethnic, culturally diverse curriculum. And then the author notes, note that the students will project the requisite attitudes, not study, not understand, not even learn about. They will project. So in other words, we're shifting from an education of knowing things to this is how we expect you to behave. And they talk about a chapter called lip syncing, which we'll get into near the end of that chapter. But what ended up happening is the National Education Association aligned themselves in a very interesting place because they had not only nonprofit status, but also specific union and lobbyist protections. It basically made them one of the most powerful organizations in American society and gave them the power and the clout to force that viewpoint upon school districts who even would oppose their viewpoints. And that is an interesting concept as we're looking through the idea of the blob and of formulating all of these things. And, you know, what I was thinking about is how does all of this work together? What's the best analysis of all of this? Well, it comes down to what I think, and I remember us having conversations with a friend who used to be in Scouts. And the question is, should he finish his Eagle Scout or just quit altogether? And then I also, though, started thinking this is so much applicable to modern schools, where we're not any longer about learning the material. We're so focused on the check mark. And so coming through Boy Scouts, I would take the kid camping, and, you know, as a mid to late teen, he still didn't know anything about making a fire. Like, been in Boy Scouts since, you know, the Tiger Cubs. Doesn't know how to build a fire. And that's not a condemnation of this student. That's a condemnation of the Boy Scouts of America that are so focused on, have you gotten the merit badge and the merit badge and the merit badge? He's had the fire building merit badge and still doesn't know how to build fire. Like, what? I mean, that's something like kids who don't even go to Boy Scouts know how to do, but you get a merit badge in it and you don't know anything about it. Well, education has become the same way. They're so concerned about, have you had the prereq? Have you had the test? Have you checked off the box and checked off the box? And I've explained in other places how I didn't care if you've had algebra. I cared if you know algebra, because I'd actually give my students in chemistry the first lab was kind of designed to show them, if you can't do this level work, you should probably drop out now. And this lab is being presented to you during the add drop period so you can safely move your classes around without impacting your performance in any class. Because what I would do is I would give them an envelope with 10 pennies in it. Half of those, or some of those pennies were new, some of those pennies were old, and they had to tell me, without opening the envelope, how many pennies are old and how many pennies are new. This question required an in-depth knowledge of practical algebra. If you didn't know how to do that, you're not going to do well in this class. I don't care if you've had algebra. I don't care if you've passed algebra. I care if you know algebra. And so, another student asked me, because he's going off to another school for engineering, and said, "Hey, my parents think that I want to, I should go back and take the class. I think that I should try and test out of this class." And what my advice to him is, sit down and take the test and examine it. And if you truly know the material, it's worth skipping the class. If you don't try and get out of it just because you've already had it. The question is, do you know the material? And that is what these special interests and what this new outcome-based education is not as interested in. They don't care if you understand material. They care if you've been through a check mark. And so, looking at chapter 18 on the outcome-based education, what they're doing here is he's looking at several different schools and the things they're doing. And in these outcome-based education plans, there's the theory and philosophy behind it is fairly sound, but like most education philosophies, these were put together by people who've never spent any time in a classroom and do not have the capability, or the classroom rather doesn't have the capability of engaging in such an action. You don't have the ability to sit down and truly do such a thing. And so, looking at what they're trying to accomplish, I thought that some of the goals were interesting. In fact, his chapter here, or his section rather, is titled Goals from Hell. It was very interesting as they're talking about the various viewpoints and what the students are supposed to learn. And this is kind of where we got into that quote earlier. So educational outcomes. So here's some Pennsylvania educational outcomes. Oh Lord, this was my state. All students develop interpersonal communication, decision-making, coping, and evaluation skills and apply them to personal, family, and community living. And the question that behooves us is, what does this have to do with academic skill? Nothing. All students relate in writing, speech, and other media the history and nature of various forms of prejudice to current problems facing communities, nations, including the United States. This is a social agenda. This is not an educational reform. This is a social agenda. And that's the biggest problem, is when you try and force all of these things in. So all students make environmentally sound decisions in their personal and civic lives. Again, it's like, what are you doing? And so they get down to the bottom, and they're really talking about forcing viewpoints, forcing agendas, and that's what we're getting now in the colleges. You get into colleges, and it's more about teaching the students that all white males are the spawn of the devil. We may as well have horns growing out of our heads. But you think that these college students leave knowing much? Very little. I know a guy who owns businesses. If somebody applies to work at his job with a recent college degree, he just throws the application away. He's like, these students don't come out of college knowing anything. They come out of college trying to assert their opinions on the rest of the world. He says, I'm sorry, I've been doing this since before their parents were alive. I'm not going to sit here and have some arrogant student come in here and try and pass his ideology onto me and my workplace. We have a job to do. And that's the reality of the matter. And so they kind of end down with looking at some of these goals. So we already talked about this first goal, which was they will project certain behaviors. The second goal is arts. Third goal is students will demonstrate positive attitudes towards life, living, and learning through understanding and respect of others. And then it's not until goal 7 that they talk about math, and goal 8 that they actually get around to teaching kids how to write. And so this kind of jumped over to this concept of mastery learning. And in mastery learning, this is that viewpoint. Now, this is the school district that I was at when I was teaching at the last college I was at. The school district utilized mastery learning. I looked at this and said, this is not teaching this kid anything. And I mean, the school had a 40% high school graduation rate. The kids that did graduate, most of them were dumb as rocks. And what ended up happening is they'd go in, and if they fail the test, they could just keep retaking it and retaking it and retaking it. I said, at what point in time do you stop? Because, I can keep doing it until the end of the year. What? What is that teaching you about life? If I'm hiring you for a project, I don't got 3 months to get everything right. We got to get it right. We got to get this going. We're losing money here. And that's what's very important. And so the mastery view, so then the guy who came down and started an organization, basically a network for outcome-based schools, he was pleading with people not to use the word mastery learning because while he liked the philosophy, he didn't like the bad publicity that came along with it. And that was interesting. And so as we're diving in here, we're looking at what some of these views are, and again, it's not about anything knowledge based. Now we get into this section on lip syncing, and this was the very interesting section to me, because this so highlights what modern education is about. It's not about learning material and learning how to apply it. It's about taking one application and trying to duplicate it in the kids. So, okay, this is what the concept of modern portfolio views is like. Like, okay, we're going to simulate a project. Here's some projects for you. Go do the projects, and then you come out and you're like, ooh, look, I have my little project. Well, you don't really have a little project. You have a situation where you are putting the kids in a situation where, with very little information, with very little practicality, they're just trying to duplicate one process. They don't learn much more about it than duplicating that one process. But what this ends up producing is kids who have been through a session. So the concept here is looking at, the example that they used here is, Richard Mitchell notes the difference between actually knowing a discipline and acting if one knew it is the difference between being trained to play Lady of Spain on bicycle horns and actually knowing something about music. Musicians, after all, have been known how to play Lady of Spain. So if you go in and you say, hey, we're going to teach you how to sing this one or play this one song, now you must be a musician. No, you know how to do one song, but you don't understand musical theory. You don't understand how chords work. You don't understand how all of the ins and outs of musical theory goes. And so they don't go into what is wrong with all the outcomes, which is definitely interesting stuff. And then they hit this reality check where they're kind of going through and going through this very interesting view of the Three Little Pigs, where they read two different versions of a story, and then they have to do a mock court case about whether the pigs are guilty or the wolf is guilty or whatever is guilty or innocent. It doesn't really matter. And so what they're doing is they're putting all this stuff together, and in light of putting all this stuff together, the outcome-based education says, see, the kids now know what a trial looks like. They read a little bit about lawyers, or maybe they don't, because they're not required to read. It could be read, or it could be listened to. So this is a writing class. We can't even read? And then it goes into, what are they actually learning about the story or the process when they're reading about all these different viewpoints? And the question is, would it not be better to actually sit down and learn and do real work? And that's really the ultimate issue behind the outcome-based education, is we lose the ability to actually do real knowledge and apply it to our life. So that's this section. I think next week we might actually do a little interlude, because an article just came out in The Conversation looking at the Bill and Melinda Gates new educational models, and I thought it'd be a very fitting place to stop and do a week analyzing what their viewpoints are, and then we should finish this up probably within, I'm guessing it's going to take us 2 more weeks to finish this up. So about 3 weeks we'll be done. So start leaving thoughts in the comments down below. What topic should we cover on outdoor philosophy next? Let me know. So thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy your daily walk in our Lord.